Hello everyone and welcome back to Nocturnal Narrative Studio. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know which country you're listening from. Without further ado, let's begin the story. I should have trusted my gut the moment Danny suggested the trip. We had been best friends since 3rd grade, the kind of friendship where you finish each other's sentences and share clothes without asking. So when she texted me in June saying her family had a campsite booked near Hollow Creek and that her parents wanted me to come along, I said yes before I even finished reading the message. I packed that same night, shoved my favorite gray hoodie, my journal with the sunflower on the cover, my little Polaroid camera, and the necklace my grandmother left me, a small gold one with a crescent moon, into my backpack and told my mom I'd be back Sunday. The drive up was easy. Danny's parents, Mark and Cheryl, were the kind of adults who crack jokes the whole car ride and let you pick the music. Danny and I sat in the back sharing earbuds, watching the trees get thicker on either side of the highway. By the time we pulled down the gravel road toward the campsite, the sun was sitting low and golden through the pines, and everything felt like the opening scene of a good memory. The site itself was beautiful, a flat clearing with a stone fire ring, a picnic table worn smooth by weather and time, and a short trail leading down to a creek you could hear but not yet see. I took 3 Polaroids before we even finished unloading the car. I felt completely safe. That feeling didn't last. The first thing I noticed was small. That first evening, I had set my Polaroid camera on the picnic table while I helped Danny hang the string lights her mom brought. When I came back, it was on the ground. I figured the wind knocked it off. I picked it up, checked it, and set it inside the tent instead. No big deal. Then at dinner, I went to put on my gray hoodie because the temperature had dropped fast the way it does in the hills, and I couldn't find it. I checked my backpack twice. I asked Danny if she'd grabbed it by mistake. She shrugged and said I probably left it in the car. Mark checked the car. It wasn't there. I let it go because what else do? You tell yourself you packed wrong. You eat your hot dog and watch the fire and tell yourself it's fine. The second day was good enough that I almost forgot about the hoodie. We hiked the creek trail, skipped rocks, ate sandwiches on a log. Danny was laughing and exactly innocently the person I'd been friends with since we were 8 years old. But that night, something changed. After her parents went to sleep, Danny got quiet in a way that didn't feel like tiredness. She kept checking her phone under her sleeping bag, the light catching her face at weird angles. I asked her who she was texting. She said nobody. Just her cousin. I believed her. I woke up sometime after 2 in the morning to a sound I couldn't place. It wasn't the creek and it wasn't wind. It was lower than both, a slow, deliberate crunching of footsteps on dry leaves circling the tent, not moving away, just circling. I lay completely still, staring at the dark ceiling of the tent, counting. 6 steps. Stop. 6 steps. Stop. I reached over and shook Danny's shoulder. She was already awake. She told me it was probably a deer. Her voice was flat, not scared. Flat. I know the difference between a deer and a person walking, but I didn't say that out loud. I just pulled my sleeping bag up to my chin and waited until it stopped. In the morning, I noticed my journal was gone. Not misplaced, gone. I had put it in the mesh pocket inside the tent before bed. I always put it there, same way every night, same pocket. I turned the tent inside out. I checked the picnic table, the car, the area around the fire ring. Mark and Cheryl helped me look, and Mark kept saying it must have slipped into someone's bag by accident. But there was something off about the way Danny stood during all of this. She didn't help search. She stood near the tree line with her coffee and watched. And when our eyes met, she looked down at her phone. I told myself I was being paranoid. This was my best friend. We had grown up together. She had been there when my grandmother died. She was the one who sat with me on my kitchen floor at midnight eating cereal after my parents told me they were separating. People like that don't do things that need explaining. The discovery happened on the last afternoon. Danny and her mom drove to the small store about 4 miles down the road to get more ice, and Mark fell asleep in his camp chair almost immediately after they left. I was sitting alone at the picnic table when I noticed Danny's smaller bag. The olive green one she kept clipped to the outside of her pack had come unzipped. I wasn't snooping. I genuinely was not. But the edge of something caught my eye. Familiar. Dark blue with a sunflower. My journal, tucked inside her bag with what looked like folded papers sticking out from between the pages. I sat there for a second looking at it. My hands went cold before I even touched it. I pulled it out slowly, like some part of me already knew I didn't want to go fast. The folded papers weren't random notes. They were printed photographs. Pictures of me, taken from a distance through the trees at the campsite. Me sleeping in my chair by the fire. Me changing near the tent with the flap not fully closed. Me on the creek trail not knowing anyone was behind me. On the back of each one, in handwriting I didn't recognize, were dates. Days before this trip. Days from other places I had been over the past few months. And one of them, the oldest one, was taken outside my bedroom window at home. There were also pages in my journal that had been torn out. The ones where I'd written about a boy I'd had feelings for. Where I'd written about a fight I'd had with my mom. Where I'd written things you only write because you believe no one else will ever read them. Gone. Just the ragged edges left behind. I don't remember making the decision to walk to Mark's chair. I just remember being there, standing in front of him, holding the journal and the photographs with both hands because I was shaking too much to hold them with one. He was awake fast when he saw my face. He looked at the photos for a long time without saying anything. Then he called Cheryl. I heard him on the phone, his voice low and controlled in the way that adults get when they are trying very hard not to lose it in front of someone younger. When Danny and Cheryl came back, the confrontation was quiet in a way that felt worse than shouting would have. Mark laid the photos on the picnic table and asked Danny to explain. Danny looked at them and then looked at me and said the photographs weren't hers. She said she didn't know how my journal got into her bag. She cried. She was very convincing. Cheryl kept looking between the photos and her daughter with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Like she was standing in a room she didn't recognize. We packed everything and left within the hour. No one talked much on the drive back. Danny stared out her window the whole way, and at one point, when I glanced at her reflection in the glass, she was already looking at me. Mark told my mom everything when we got home. Cheryl called the police 2 days later. The investigation didn't go anywhere useful. No one could prove who had taken the photos or how the journal ended up in Danny's bag, and Danny stuck to her story so cleanly that the whole thing eventually went quiet. My mom had the locks on our house changed. My dad put a camera on the exterior of my window. We never found my gray hoodie or the pages that were torn from my journal. We never found out who the handwriting belonged to on the back of those photographs. I stopped being friends with Danny. She texted me twice in the weeks after, both times saying she missed me and that she hoped I was okay. I didn't respond. I changed my number in August, 3 weeks ago. I got a message through an account I hadn't given anyone. A newer account I'd made quietly, told nobody about. No profile picture, username I didn't recognize. The message was 4 words. I still have them. I haven't slept well since. Story 2. I know how it sounds when I say my family does midnight hikes. I've been explaining it my whole life. To teachers, to friends, to the one therapist I saw in college who wrote something down when I mentioned it and then asked me to say more. It sounds strange from the outside. But when you grow up with something, when it's just the thing your family does the way other families do Sunday church or Friday pizza night, it doesn't feel strange at all. It feels like home. So let me explain it properly before I tell you what happened, because the rules mattered. The rules were the whole point. My grandfather started it. He was a forest ranger for 31 years in the hill country of Central Texas, and his belief, one he passed down to my dad and my uncles and eventually to all of us, was that you don't really know a piece of land until you've walked it in the dark. Not with a flashlight pointing at your feet, not on a marked trail. A real walk, slow and quiet, with your eyes open and your mouth shut. We did it every summer camping trip from the time I was about 7. The rule was no artificial light unless someone was hurt. The rule was you stay within earshot of the person ahead of you. The rule was if you hear something you can't explain, you stop, you wait, and you listen until you can explain it. My grandfather said the woods aren't scary. He said the woods are honest. Everything in them is exactly what it is. You just have to slow down enough to understand what you're hearing. By the time I was 19, I had done the midnight walk maybe 30 times across different sites. I knew how to move without making noise. I knew the difference between a branch dropping on its own and a branch dropped by something with weight behind it. I knew how my dad's footsteps sounded versus my Uncle Dave's versus my cousin Ricky's, who always dragged her left foot slightly on loose ground. I knew my family in the dark the way you know a song, not by thinking about it, just by hearing it. This particular trip was the summer I was 22. It was me, my dad, Uncle Dave, Ricky, and her older brother Pete, who had brought his girlfriend Amber for the first time. We were at a site we'd used twice before, out past a town called Garner in the hill country, private land that a friend of my grandfather's had let us use for years. Dense cedar and oak, a dry creek bed running along the eastern edge, a long open meadow to the west that you hit about a mile into the walk. We set up camp Friday afternoon. The plan was to do the walk Saturday night, after dinner around 11. We went over the rules with Amber at the picnic table while it was still light. She was a good sport about it. Asked smart questions, laughed in the right places. Borrowed a dark jacket from Ricky because she'd brought a white one and Pete told her that was basically the same as carrying a flashlight. We ate, cleaned up, and by 10:30 we were all sitting quietly around the dying fire letting our eyes adjust. My dad checked that everyone understood the spacing. 6 feet between each person, single file, same order every time. Dad to Dave, then me, then Ricky, then Pete, then Amber at the back. Dad had a whistle on a cord around his neck for emergencies. That was the only exception to the no equipment rule. One whistle. Never blown in all the years we'd done this. We moved out at 11:15. The cedar was thick near the campsite and the air smelled like it always does out there. Dry and a little sharp, like the trees are doing something just below what you can see. My eyes were good within the first 10 minutes. Good enough to make out the line of my Uncle Dave's shoulders ahead of me, the pale shape of the dry creek rocks when we crossed over. Amber was handling it better than I expected. I could hear her breathing, a little fast but steady, and her footsteps were careful, feeling each step before committing to it. Pete had clearly coached her. We were maybe 40 minutes in. just reaching the edge of the meadow when I noticed the sound behind me was wrong. It's hard to explain without sounding like I imagined it. But I had heard Ricky walk for 15 years. I knew the drag of her left foot, and what I was hearing behind me was not that. The steps were landing differently. Heavier on the heel, a longer stride, no drag. I slowed slightly without fully stopping, the way you do when you're trying to confirm something without alerting whatever you're trying to confirm. The steps behind me slowed too. Exactly when I did. Not a beat off, exactly. I looked over my shoulder. In the meadow light, I could just make out a shape at the distance I expected Ricky to be. The right height, roughly, dark jacket, but standing completely still, when Ricky should have still been moving because she wouldn't have had the same reason to stop that I did. I counted to 3 in my head and then kept walking. The steps behind me started again. I reached forward and touched Uncle Dave's shoulder twice, our signal for stop and wait. He stopped. The line went still. Ahead of me, Dave reached forward and touched my dad's shoulder. Behind me, from what felt like further back than it should have been, I heard Ricky's voice, low, just above a whisper, say my name. It came from the wrong direction. Ricky's voice came from my right, near the tree line, maybe 15 feet off the path, which meant whoever was walking directly behind me was not Ricky. My dad blew the whistle before I even had a chance to process the full shape of what that meant. One long blast. And then everything happened fast in the dark in the way that things do when your body understands the situation before your brain has finished working it out. Dave grabbed my arm. My dad was shouting now, not words, just his voice, loud and hard, the way you make yourself sound bigger than you are. Ricky broke from the tree line and grabbed onto the back of my jacket. Pete was yelling for Amber. We ran, not the careful, quiet walk we'd come in on, but a full run, branches catching our arms, the dry creek crossing nearly taking me down. I hit the campsite stumbling, came in behind my dad, and stood there in the dark with my whole chest heaving. We did a count. Everyone was there. Amber was crying. Pete had a long scratch down his forearm from a branch. Ricky kept saying she had stepped off the path to check something near the tree line, a sound she'd heard, and that she'd only been off for maybe a minute. A minute was all it had taken for something else to fall into her spot in the line and walk directly behind me across an open meadow. My dad lit the lantern. We sat close together and no one slept that night. Dave walked the perimeter of the campsite every hour until sunrise, and around 4 in the morning he found something near the eastern edge of the clearing, at the point where the path came back in from the woods. A line of 8 small stones had been laid out carefully across the entrance to the path, not placed casually, set in a precise line evenly spaced like something marking a boundary, or a count. Dave showed my dad. My dad looked at it for a long time and then looked out at the tree line and didn't say anything. We packed before the sun was fully up. Nobody talked about the stones on the drive out. My dad called the property owner when we got home and told him what happened. The property owner said no one had permission to be on that land besides us. We haven't gone back. For a long time, that felt like enough. Like leaving was the end of the story, and whatever it was would just stay out there in the hill country, in the cedar and the dark, and we could go back to being the family that does midnight hikes without the part that came after. Then last spring, Ricky called me. She'd gotten a small package in the mail at her apartment. No return address, postmarked from a town about 40 miles from that campsite. Inside was a single photograph printed on plain paper. It was taken from a distance, grainy, clearly shot in low light. It showed 6 people walking single file across an open meadow at night. And just behind the last person in the line, close enough to touch them, was a 7th. Story 3. The summer after my sophomore year of college, I had about $400 to my name and 3 months with nothing in them. My roommate Kat had been talking since April about doing a camping trip somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. The kind of trip that looks like a screensaver, she kept saying, with the fog and the tall trees and the green that doesn't exist anywhere else. I wanted to go, I really did. But camping gear adds up fast when you don't own any of it, and campsite fees at the good spots in Washington were running $40, $50 a night when you added the reservation fees on top. I was quietly doing the math and coming up short when Kat sent a link to a listing on one of those outdoor hosting sites, the kind where private landowners open their property to campers for cheaper than the state parks. The listing was for a site in a rural stretch of the Olympic Peninsula, listed by a man named Gerald, with a price of $12 a night, 12. The photos showed a wide flat clearing backed by old-growth Douglas fir, a stone fire ring, a hand-pumped well, and a covered lean-to for gear. The reviews were sparse, only 3 of them, but all positive. One person had written quiet, private, no one bothers you. We booked 4 nights, there were 4 of us. Me, Kat, our friend Marcus, who owned most of the gear we'd be borrowing, and his girlfriend Priya, who had grown up camping and was the only one of us who actually knew what she was doing. We rented a car, packed it the night before, and left Seattle at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday in July. The drive took us west through smaller and smaller towns until the towns stopped, and it was just the 2-lane road and the trees pressing in from both sides. The GPS lost signal about 20 minutes before we reached the turnoff. Gerald had emailed directions typed out old school, turn left at the big split cedar, follow the dirt road for 1.2 miles, site will be on your right. We found the split cedar. We found the dirt road. We found the site. The clearing was exactly like the photos, maybe more beautiful in person. The fir trees behind it were enormous, the kind that take 3 people linking hands to wrap around, with bark that looks like it's been carved by centuries. The air was cold for Jolly, wet with the kind of deep moisture that comes up from the ground in old forests. Priya walked the perimeter right away, checking drainage and ground slope the way she always did, and gave it a thumbs up. Marcus got the tent footprints laid out. Kat and I unpacked the food and found the hand pump, which took some convincing but worked. We made lunch and ate it on a log facing the trees, and it was one of those hours that feels like everything you wanted a thing to be. Gerald had told us in his email that he lived about 2 miles down the same road in a house set back from the road, and that if we needed anything we could knock. He asked only that we not go past the eastern edge of the clearing, which was marked by a rusted orange fence post. He said the land beyond it was not part of the property he owned and that the footing was poor. That seemed reasonable. We didn't think about it much. The first day passed without anything worth noting. The second morning was when the small things started. Priya noticed that the camp chairs Marcus had set up around the fire ring the night before had been moved. Not knocked over, moved, repositioned. 2 of them had been turned to face the tree line on the east side, toward the orange fence post. Priya asked if any of us had moved them during the night. No one had. Marcus said it was probably the wind, and Priya gave him the look she always gave him when he said something that didn't hold up, but she let it go. That afternoon, I went to get my rain jacket from my bag and found that my headlamp was missing. I clearly remembered packing it. It was on the list I'd checked off the morning we left. I asked everyone. No one had moved it. I borrowed Kat's backup. The missing headlamp felt like nothing. Just a thing that gets lost in the shuffle of 4 people sharing a space and moving gear in and out of a car. I told myself that. The second night was when the feeling changed. We had the fire going and were maybe an hour into just talking. The kind of slow, easy conversation that only happens when you're outside with no screens and nothing to be anywhere. When Marcus stopped mid-sentence, he said, "Did you hear that?" We all went quiet. From the direction of the east tree line, past the orange fence post, there was a sound that I can only describe as rhythmic. Not mechanical, not an animal, or at least not one I could match to anything I knew. A low, steady sound that had a beat to it, like something being hit against wood at regular intervals. Slow, patient. We sat listening for almost a full minute before it stopped. Priya said it was probably someone further in the forest, another camper maybe doing something with their camp. That seemed like the most logical answer, so we went with it. But I noticed that after that, no one faced away from the east tree line for the rest of the night. We slept okay, but I woke up at some point, I think around 3, needing to use the bathroom. I unzipped the tent as quietly as I could, stepped out, and stood up. The clearing was full of fog, the kind that sits knee-high and makes everything above it look like it's floating. I was standing there letting my eyes adjust when I saw the light. It was on the other side of the orange fence post, maybe 40 feet into the trees. A dull amber glow, not a flashlight, nothing sharp or directed, just a warm, stationary glow sitting in the dark between the trunks. I stood looking at it for what felt like a long time. It didn't move. I went back to the tent and lay awake until it got light outside. I told the others at breakfast. Marcus wanted to go look. Priya said absolutely not. Kat kept asking if I was sure it wasn't just my eyes adjusting to the dark doing something weird. I was sure. We agreed to watch for it the following night. We didn't have to wait that long. That afternoon, while Kat and Priya were down at a small creek we'd found on a trail north of the clearing, Marcus and I were at the campsite when we heard footsteps at the edge of the east tree line. Not from behind the fence post, but right at the tree line, in the shadow just where the clearing light didn't reach. We both heard it at the same time. Out, "Hello, nothing," he called again. Then a rock came out of the trees. Not thrown hard, not in an aggressive way, more like dropped from a low angle, and it landed about 6 feet from where we were standing. We did not go to see where it came from. When the girls came back, we told them. Priya called Gerald's number, which he'd included in the confirmation email. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. She left a calm message explaining what had happened and asking him to call back. He didn't call back that afternoon. That night, we kept the fire big and stayed up late, and no one said out loud that they were scared, but no one suggested sleeping early either. At some point after midnight, Kat grabbed my arm and pointed toward the tent. On the rainfly, the outside of the tent, facing the east tree line, something had been scratched or drawn while we sat there. We hadn't heard it happen. We hadn't seen anyone near the tent. But there it was, a series of straight lines scored into the material, rough but deliberate, arranged in 4 groups. Tally marks, 4 sets of 4, 19 marks total. We had been there for parts of 3 days. There were 4 of us. Marcus pulled the tent stakes before I finished counting. We packed in 20 minutes in the dark using Kat's backup headlamp and the lantern. We put everything in the car without speaking above a whisper. The drive down the dirt road felt long in a way it hadn't on the way in. When we reached the paved road and the GPS signal came back, Priya finally exhaled and said, "We're calling the police when we get to town." We did. A county sheriff's deputy took the report by phone and sounded bored until Priya described the tally marks, and then he got quiet and asked us to stay in town in case someone needed to speak with us in person. We stayed at a motel. No one came to speak with us in person. When we got back to Seattle, Kat left a review on the listing, 1 star, full description of what happened, and the listing was taken down within 48 hours. We tried to find Gerald's full name through the hosting site and were told they couldn't share host information. I sent a message through the site's system asking Gerald directly what was on the other side of that fence post and why the listing came down. The message was marked as read. He never replied. The deputy who took our report called me 6 days later. He said someone had been out to the property. He said the land past the orange fence post showed signs of regular activity. He said he wasn't able to share more than that. When I asked him if we had been in danger, he paused for a long time. Then he said he thought we were smart to leave when we did. He didn't say anything after that. He just thanked me for reporting it and ended the call. Story 4. My great-uncle Ronan died in February of the year I turned 26, and because he had no children and his 2 siblings, my grandmother and her brother Carl, had both died before him, the whole of his estate passed to my mother, who wanted nothing to do with it and handed it to me with a phone call that lasted less than 3 minutes. He left a savings account with a little under $8,000 in it, a 1994 pickup truck that needed work, a storage unit in a town called Delwood in northern Minnesota, and 42 acres of forested land about 6 miles outside that same town with a small cabin on it. My mother had met Ronan maybe 4 times in her life. I had met him twice. He was a quiet man who kept to himself and spent most of his adult life, as far as anyone in the family knew, alone on that land. We didn't know much more than that because no one had ever asked. That was the first thing I should have paid more attention to. How little anyone had thought to ask. I drove up to Delwood in March, when the snow was still on the ground but the roads were clear enough. I figured I'd spend a week sorting through the storage unit, walk the land, decide whether to sell or hold the property, and drive back home. The storage unit was the first stop, a squat orange, doored place on the edge of town run by a man at a front desk who recognized Ronan's name when I gave it and looked at me for a beat too long before handing over the key. The unit was a 10 by 10 space packed with the organized belongings of a man who had spent decades alone with his own thoughts and his own systems. Shelving units along both walls held labeled boxes, tax records, tools, books, maps. In the back corner, stacked separately from everything else and covered with a canvas tarp, were the camping supplies, and there were a lot of them. Not the casual weekend trip kind, serious, long-used gear with the wear patterns of someone who had spent real time outdoors. A canvas wall tent, heavy and old, rope and careful coils, a wooden map case, 3 metal camp lanterns of a kind I hadn't seen outside of antique stores, and underneath all of it, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with a cord, a flat rectangular package about the size of a large book. I unwrapped it at the folding table near the unit door. It was a journal, not one journal but several, actually bound together with the cord, 5 of them spanning dates from 1987 to 2019. Ronan's handwriting, which I recognized from an old birthday card my mother had kept, was small and precise and filled every page with almost no margin. I sat on an overturned plastic bin and read for 2 hours without meaning to. What I read didn't make sense to me at first, not because it was written unclearly, but because the things it described were things I didn't have a category for. Ronan had been going to the same location on his land every year. Not camping in the general sense, camping in one specific spot, returning to it, documenting it. Each journal entry was dated and included weather, moon phase, what he brought, what he heard, what he saw. In the early journals, the entries read like a naturalist log, orderly, observational. But around 1993, the tone changed. He started writing about something he called the agreement, always lowercase, always without explanation, as though he was writing for himself and already knew what it meant. Phrases repeated across entries over the years: kept my end, site undisturbed, offering place, did not look past the markers. In a 1997 entry he wrote, it has asked for more this year. I said yes, I don't know what else to do. The land is quiet when I do and loud when I don't, and I can't live with the loud anymore. I read that 3 times. The cabin was small and cold and smelled like wood smoke and something older underneath it. I got the wood stove going and slept there that first night in a sleeping bag on the old iron bed, and I told myself the sounds I heard outside were just the woods adjusting to the dropping temperature the way woods do, ticking and settling, normal. But somewhere around 2 in the morning I woke up to the sound of the camp lanterns. The 3 metal ones I'd brought in from the storage unit and set on the kitchen table, and they were all lit, all 3 of them burning at a low steady glow. I had not lit them. I was certain of that, with the kind of certainty that sits in your chest rather than your head. I lay in the bed and looked from across the room for a long time. Then I got up and turned them off one by one. They were warm. They had been burning for a while. I drove into Delwood the next morning and found the county records office and spent the better part of the day going through property and permit records for Ronan's land. What I found was that between 1987 and 2019, Ronan had filed for and received 11 separate land use extensions for what was listed on the forms as seasonal habitation and site maintenance. Normal enough. But attached to 4 of those filings were handwritten addenda that the county had kept without, as far as I could tell, anyone ever reading them carefully. In those addenda, Ronan had described the location of what he called the marked site, a specific spot in the northeast corner of the land, and had formally requested that no surveying, development, or disturbance of any kind be conducted within 200 feet of it. He cited no legal reason. He just kept filing the same request, and the county kept attaching it to the record, and no one had ever followed up. I found the marked site on my second day on the land. It wasn't hard to find because there was a path to it, narrow but worn, starting from behind the cabin and running northeast through the birch and pine. I almost wish it had been harder to find. The site was a small clearing, maybe 20 feet across, ringed by stones that had been placed with obvious care over a long time. Some of them sunk deep into the ground, covered in lichen old. Inside the ring, the ground was different from the surrounding forest floor. Darker, softer. In the center there was a flat stone, larger than the others, and on it someone had recently placed a small bundle of things tied with a strip of cloth. Recently, as in since Ronan died, as in sometime in the past 6 weeks, the cloth was dry. The items underneath it hadn't been touched by weather yet. I went back to the journals. I read them in order this time, all 5 taking notes. The shape of it came together slowly and then all at once, the way understanding something you don't want to understand always does. Ronan had found the site when he first bought the land in 1987. Something had happened during his first winter there. He never described it directly, only referred to it as the first loud season. And afterward he had gone to the marked site and done something he described only as making the first offer. From that point forward, as long as he returned to the site each year and left what was asked, the land was, in his words, quiet. The years he missed. There were 3, documented in the journals with shaking handwriting and entries that grew shorter and more broken as each season went on, were bad years. A journal entry from the winter of 2004, a year he'd missed. I haven't slept in the cabin in 11 days. Something moves outside every night from dark to light. I found the door to the root cellar open 4 mornings in a row. I found my name written in the frost on the inside of the kitchen window. I will go to the site tomorrow. I will not miss again. He hadn't missed again. Until he died. The night after I found the journals, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time thinking about what kind of person I was and what kind of person does something like this. Then I went to the storage unit and I took the canvas tarp and some of what I found under it, and I walked the path in the dark to the marked site, and I left something there. I don't know if I did it right. There was no instruction for it written anywhere. I just did what felt like what the journal was pointing toward, and I walked back and I lay in the bed and I listened. The woods were quiet. I have been back 4 times since. I keep the visits in a new journal, my own, not Ronan's. I note the date, the weather, the moon. I note what I brought and where I placed it. I do not go past the stones. I do not look at what is inside the bundle that is always there when I arrive, always different from what I left. I have stopped asking how that is possible. I tried selling the land once, 8 months after Ronan died. I found a buyer and signed the first set of papers and drove home. That night was the loudest night I have ever experienced in a building. I called the buyer in the morning and told him the deal was off. I still live in my city. I still have my regular life. But I drive to Delwood 4 times a year and I walk the path and I do what needs to be done. My mother asks why I kept the land. I tell her I just couldn't let it go. That's one way to say it. Last month I found a 6th journal in a box I hadn't opened yet in the storage unit. The dates on the cover run from 2020 to 2024. After Ronan should have stopped being able to write anything, the handwriting inside is his. The last entry is dated 11 days after his death certificate was filed. It says only, I told it someone would come. I told it they would keep the agreement. Don't make me wrong about that. I have read that entry many times now. I'm not sure if it was meant to comfort me or to warn me. Some nights it feels like the other. Most nights I don't sleep well either way. Story 5. I found the job listing on a Thursday in October, which was the same week my landlord had slipped a late notice under my door and my checking account had dropped below $200 for the first time in my adult life. I had been out of work for 11 weeks following a company restructure that eliminated my entire department in one afternoon meeting, and I had applied to so many positions over those that the listings had started blurring together into one long document of rejection. So when I saw the posting, outdoor site coordinator, seasonal contract, remote wilderness location, housing provided, the 20-day K-hour. I read it 3 times to make sure I wasn't misreading the pay rate. I sent my resume that same night. The company was called Meridian Land Services. Their website was clean and minimal. A logo, a brief description of services that amounted to land surveying and site assessment for private clients, a contact form. Nothing that raised any flags on its own. The interview was a video call with a man named Douglas who had a calm, flat way of speaking that I chalked up to professionalism. He asked standard questions about my comfort with remote locations, my physical fitness, my ability to follow detailed written protocols. He told me the site was in a wilderness area in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, that I would be part of a small team of 4, that housing would be provided in a staff cabin on site, and that the contract was for 8 weeks. He said the work involved documenting site conditions, maintaining equipment, and logging daily observations. He said some of the protocols might seem unusual, but that they were standard procedure for this type of land assessment. I said that was fine. I needed the money. I signed the contract digitally that same evening without reading every clause the way I should have, which is something I have thought about many times since. I drove up on a Sunday in early November. The site was 2 hours past the last town of any real size down a series of logging roads that the GPS handled poorly, and I arrived at the staff cabin in the early dark of a late afternoon to find 2 of my 3 co-workers already there. Benny was a compact, cheerful man in his late 30s who had done 3 previous contracts with Meridian and talked about it the way people talk about a job they've made peace with. Sarah was quieter, mid-20s, precise in her movements, someone who measured her words before using them. The third team member, a man named Callum, arrived an hour after me and said almost nothing during dinner beyond confirming his name and asking where he should put his gear. Douglas arrived the following morning to conduct what he called orientation. He walked us through the site, a wide stretch of old forest surrounding a central clearing about half a mile from the cabin, and explained the daily procedures. Each of us would be assigned a quadrant of the surrounding area. We were to walk our quadrant twice daily, once at 7 in the morning and once at 4 in the afternoon. Using a provided GPS unit to mark any changes from the previous log, we were to photograph anything unusual using company-issued cameras, not our personal phones. We were not to enter the central clearing under any circumstances. This rule, Douglas said, was a safety issue relating to unstable ground at the center of the clearing. He said it with the practiced smoothness of someone who had said it many times. Benny didn't react to it at all. Sarah wrote it in her notebook without looking up. I wrote it down too and told myself it was a liability thing, a company covering itself against an injury claim. There were other rules. We were not to be outside between 11 at night and 5 in the morning. We were not to approach the eastern boundary of the site, which was marked with orange tape on the trees. We were not to discuss the specifics of our work with anyone outside the team, a standard confidentiality clause that had been in the contract. We were to report any sounds we heard during the night by logging them on a sheet pinned inside each of our bedroom doors. Time, duration, description, direction. I had signed a contract that included a night sound logging requirement and had not noticed it because I had not read carefully enough. The first week was cold and quiet and almost boring. My quadrant was the northwest section, a dense mix of spruce and birch that was genuinely beautiful in the early morning frost. I walked it, I logged it. I photographed 2 fallen trees and a section of ground that showed signs of animal burrowing. I ate dinner with the team and slept and did it again. Benny was good company in the evenings. He cooked well and kept the conversation light and never talked about previous contracts in any detail when I asked. That last part I noticed but didn't press. Sarah started talking to me at the end of the first week, in the small way that people talk when they want to tell you something without telling you something. She asked me once, while we were both washing dishes, whether I had read my full contract before signing. I said mostly. She nodded and didn't follow it up. 2 days later, she asked me if I'd noticed what the night sound log was actually tracking. I said I'd assumed it was for wildlife documentation. She said that's what I assumed the first time too. I asked what she meant by the first time. She said she had done a previous Meridian contract 2 years ago at a different site. I asked what that site had been like. She looked at the door to the main room where Benny and Callum were sitting and said, "Just pay attention to what direction the sounds come from." Then she picked up her book and that was the end of it. I started paying attention. The sounds came from the clearing. Not every night, but most nights, starting around 1 in the morning and lasting between 20 minutes and 2 hours. They were not animal sounds. I don't know how else to say that without sounding like I'm being dramatic. I have spent time outdoors my whole life and I know what animals sound like at night across a range of sizes and behaviors, and what I was logging on that sheet on my bedroom door was not that. It was rhythmic in stretches and then not rhythmic at all. It was sometimes low enough that I felt it before I heard it. On the 14th night I heard what I can only describe as a voice, not speaking words, not in any pattern I could identify as language, but produced by something with the capacity for sustained vocalization in a register that was almost human. Almost. I went to Douglas by phone the following morning and told him I had questions about the clearing. He told me the clearing was off limits and that my questions about it were outside the scope of my role. I asked him what Meridian's clients were actually assessing the land for. He said he wasn't able to share client details. I told him I wasn't comfortable continuing without understanding what I was documenting. He was quiet for a moment and then he said, in the same flat, calm voice he always used, "I'd encourage you to review Section 9 of your contract before making any decisions." He said it the way you say something to someone you want to stop talking. I reviewed Section 9 that night. It was 3 paragraphs of legal language that I had to read 4 times to understand fully. The short version was that leaving the contract before the agreed end date without cause constituted a breach, and that breach carried a financial penalty of 6 times the total contract value. 6 times. I sat on my bed doing the math. The penalty was more money than I made in a year at my old job. I did not sleep that night. Callum quit on day 19. He didn't say goodbye. His gear was simply gone when we woke up, his bedroom door open, his night sound log sheet still pinned to the door but blank for the past 4 days. Benny made breakfast and didn't mention it. Sarah looked at his empty chair and then at me and then back at her coffee. I asked Benny if Callum leaving meant he'd owe the penalty. Benny said, "Callum's done 3 of these. He knows something I don't about when to cut the loss. I stayed because I was scared of the debt." That's the truth of it. I stayed for 5 more weeks and I logged what I heard and I walked my quadrant and I never went past the orange tape and I never went near the clearing. But on my 53rd day, 4 days before my contract ended, I was doing my afternoon walk when I crossed a corner of my quadrant that brought me closer to the clearing than I had been before. Still outside the boundary, still following the rules. And I saw, through the trees, that the clearing was not empty in the way it had been presented to us. There was a structure at its center. Not a building, a structure, built from materials I couldn't fully identify at that distance, low and wide and arranged with an intention that made my stomach drop in a way I am still not able to fully explain. Around it the ground was marked in a pattern that was not natural and not random. I took 3 photographs with the company camera before I remembered that the company camera went back to Douglas at the end of the contract. I finished my last 4 days. I drove out. I have not been back. The photographs are gone, submitted with the equipment. The night sound logs are gone. My name is on a Meridian contract that includes a confidentiality clause I am technically still bound by, which is why I have never told this story using my real name or the specific location. I found work after, different work, desk work, nothing that takes me anywhere remote. I sleep with the window closed now regardless of the temperature. Not because of anything rational, just because of the sounds. The way they started at 1 in the morning, the way they came from one direction, always the same direction every single night. The clearing had a direction, my bedroom window faced it. I found Sarah on a professional networking site 8 months after the contract ended and sent her a message. Just 1 line, "Did you ever find out what it was?" She read it within the hour, she never replied. But 2 days later her profile was gone. Deleted, not deactivated, just gone. I think about that more than I think about the structure. I think about the fact that she knew enough to disappear that fast after one question. Some mornings that feels like a warning. Some mornings it feels like the only smart thing I've seen anyone do since I signed that contract on a Thursday in October when my account was below $200 and I needed something, anything, to say yes. Story 6, I applied for the solo wilderness monitoring position because I thought I needed the silence. That sounds like the setup to a joke now, but at the time it made complete sense to me. I had come out of a 2-year relationship that had ended badly and loudly. I was burned out from a city job that required me to be available and responsive every hour of the day, and when I saw the posting for a solo site monitor at a remote research station in northern Manitoba, 8 weeks, full board, a small daily stipend, all I had to do was maintain weather instruments and log daily environmental readings. It felt like the universe offering me exactly what I had been saying I needed. Quiet, structure, no people, just me and the trees and a simple job with a beginning and an end. The station was a single-room cabin about 14 kilometers from the nearest road, accessible in summer by a dirt track that the research organization's truck could manage and in winter by nothing at all. I arrived in late August, which meant I had a window of reasonable weather before the season turned. A man named Voight from the organization drove me in, showed me the instruments, walked me through the logging procedures, and left me with 8 weeks of food, a radio for emergencies, and a paper calendar on the wall with each day printed large enough to cross off clearly. He told me the previous monitor had completed the full contract without incident. He told me the radio had good range and I should check in every Sunday at 9 in the morning. He shook my hand and drove back down the dirt track, and I stood outside the cabin and listened to the truck engine fade, and then I listened to what came after the truck engine, which was the most complete silence I had ever heard. I breathed it in and felt something loosen in my chest. That loosening feeling is the thing I keep coming back to when I try to understand how I let my guard down so completely. I was so relieved to be alone that I stopped paying attention. The first 2 weeks were exactly what I had come for. I woke with the light, checked the instruments, logged the readings in the black hardcover notebook the organization had provided, crossed the day off the calendar, made food, read, slept. The routine had a weight and a rhythm that felt like medicine. I started a personal journal alongside the official log, a smaller red notebook I had brought from home, and my entries from those first weeks are easy to read back, full sentences, good observations, a person who is doing well. The first thing I noticed was the mug. I had one ceramic mug that I used every morning, and I kept it on the left side of the small shelf above the gas burner. On the morning of day 16 I reached for it, and it was on the right side. I stood looking at it for a moment and then I picked it up and made my coffee and told myself I had moved it without thinking. That's what you do with a thing like that. You absorb it and move on because the alternative, taking it seriously, requires you to accept something your brain isn't ready to accept yet. Over the following week, small things kept being slightly wrong. The logbook would be open to a page I didn't remember leaving it on. My boots, which I always left parallel to the door, would be at an angle. The calendar, the large paper one on the wall, Was missing an X on day 19 when I was certain I had crossed it off. I went back to my red journal to check. The red journal said I had crossed off day 19. The calendar said otherwise. I stood between those two pieces of information for a long time, and then I crossed off day 19 and told myself I had forgotten. I mentioned it on my Sunday check-in with Voight, framed lightly, the way you mention something when you're not sure if it's worth mentioning. I said I'd been having some small memory issues, forgetting whether I'd done things. He said that was common in solo postings, that the sameness of the days caused a kind of routine blur, and that I should make sure I was getting enough water and keeping my sleep schedule consistent. His voice was warm and practical and completely reasonable, and I hung up the radio and felt better for about 3 hours before I noticed that the pen I had been using to make the call, which I had set on the table before picking up the radio receiver, was on the windowsill. I had not gotten up during the call. I had not been near the windowsill. I wrote it down in the red journal immediately. Date, time, exact description. I started doing that with everything. Logging small displacements, times the exact position of objects before I left them. I drew diagrams of how things were arranged on the shelf, on the table. I needed data because I could not trust my memory, and I needed to know whether the problem was inside my head or outside it. For about 5 days the logs showed nothing. Everything was where I left it. Nothing moved, and I started feeling embarrassed about the diagrams. I wrote in the red journal on day 29, think I was just adjusting to the isolation. Everything normal, feeling more settled. On day 30 I woke up and my watch said 3 a.m. and the light outside was full morning daylight. I checked the watch 3 times, I shook it. I held it to my ear and it was ticking normally. I checked the logbook. My last entry was for day 29, made it what I had written as 9 in the evening. There was no way it was 3 in the morning with that quality of light outside. I went to the calendar. Day 30 had not crossed it off. I had been asleep. The handwriting of the X was mine. I checked it against every other X on the calendar and it matched my handwriting, on a day I had not yet lived through enough to cross off. I called Voight on the radio that morning, which was not a Sunday, which I had not done before. I told him about the watch and the calendar and the moved objects and the pen on the windowsill. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked me if I had seen any wildlife near the cabin. Specifically, he said around the north side. The specificity of that question, not wildlife in general, but north side specifically, hit me in a way I couldn't fully process while I was on the call. I said I hadn't. He said to keep the cabin locked at night, which it already was, and to call him if anything escalated. The word he used was escalated. Not happened. Escalated. Like there was an existing situation with levels. I stopped sleeping well after that call. I lay in the dark and listened to the silence, which had stopped feeling like medicine and started feeling like something held in place by effort. Like silence that was being maintained. On the 34th night I heard something move on the north side of the cabin. Not animal movement, not the random irregular noise of something foraging. A slow, single movement. A weight shifting, then stillness. I lay without breathing for a very long time. Then it happened again. The same sound, the same weight, the same deliberate quality. Once every few minutes, over the course of 2 hours, something moved on the north side of my cabin and then went still and then moved again, like something that was not in a hurry. I did not go to the window. I want to be clear that I made that choice consciously, and I believe it was the right choice. I lay in the bed with my eyes open and I waited, and I logged the sounds by time in the red journal, and at some point before dawn they stopped, and I must have slept, because the next thing I knew it was full light. The north side of the cabin showed nothing when I looked in the morning. No tracks, though the ground there was hard enough that tracks were unlikely. No marks on the wall. Nothing disturbed in the narrow space between the cabin and the tree line. Nothing I could point to and say, here, this is the proof, except for the logbook, the official black hardcover logbook. It was open to day 34's entry, which I had written the evening before the night of sounds. And at the bottom of that entry, below my last line of recorded data, in handwriting that was close to mine but not mine, slightly larger, slightly heavier on the downstrokes, was a single word: comfortable. I packed what I could carry in an hour and I started walking the 14 kilometers to the road. I did not call Voight first. I did not leave a note. I walked out in one stretch and reached the road in the early afternoon and flagged down a passing truck and sat in the passenger seat and shook for the entire 2-hour drive to the nearest town. The driver didn't ask questions. I was grateful for that. Voight called me 3 days later on my cell phone, which I had never given him. The organization had my email and my emergency contact number, which was my sister's. Not my cell, I let it ring out. He called again the next day, and the day after that I never answered. I am back in my city now. New apartment, different neighborhood, a job that keeps me busy. I sleep with the light on, which my previous self would have found embarrassing. I keep the red journal on my nightstand, and I have not written in it since I got back, because I am not ready to document what I've noticed. The mug, I keep it on the left side of the shelf above my kettle. Every few days I find it on the right. I move it back. I write nothing down. I tell myself there is an explanation. But the handwriting in the logbook was almost mine, and whatever learned my handwriting well enough to get that close had 8 weeks to practice. I don't think it stopped when I left. I think it just moved. Story 7. I want to be careful about how I write this because I am still, 3 years later, not sure who reads what I put online. That probably sounds like the thing a paranoid person says. By the end of this, you can decide for yourself whether paranoid is the right word. It started on a Thursday night in July at a campground called Ridgeline Basin in a national forest in the Pacific Northwest that I am going to leave unnamed for reasons that will become clear. I was there alone. A solo trip, 4 nights, something I did every summer to reset. I had a site at the eastern end of the campground loop, backed up against a slope of old Douglas fir, with a view down toward the central meadow that the loop road wrapped around. Good site. I had stayed there before. I knew the layout. I was sitting outside my tent around 10 at night, fire burned down to coals, reading with a headlamp when I saw the lights in the meadow. Not campfire lights, moving lights, white and steady, 4 of them in a loose cluster, moving in a pattern I couldn't make sense of from where I sat. My first thought was other campers with headlamps, but the movement was wrong for that. Too coordinated, too slow. I watched for about 10 minutes and then I took out my phone and filmed 2 minutes of it before the lights stopped moving and simply went out, all at once, like a switch had been thrown. I went to sleep thinking it was some kind of survey crew or ranger activity. Told myself I'd ask at the camp host station in the morning. I woke up at 4:45 to voices outside my tent. Calm, low, professional voices, the kind used by people who are trying not to wake a campground while also not trying very hard. I unzipped the tent fly and looked out. There were 3 of them. 2 men and a woman, all in dark green uniforms with agency patches I could see but not read in the low light, all wearing radios on their chest straps, all moving through the eastern end of the campground with small flashlights pointed at the ground. One of them saw me looking out and walked over. He was maybe 50 square-faced, with the kind of steady eye contact that gets practiced rather than grown into. He said there had been a reported disturbance in the meadow area overnight, and they were doing a routine check. He asked if I had seen or heard anything unusual. I told him about the lights. He wrote something on a small notepad. He asked me what time I had observed them. I told him. He asked if I had taken any photographs. I said I had taken video on my phone. He said he might need me to share that for their report and handed me a card with a name, Supervisor D. Harlan, Forest Service, and a phone number, and told me someone would follow up that morning. He thanked me and walked back to the others. The 3 of them moved to the next site. I lay back down and did not sleep again. No one followed up that morning. I went to the camp host station at 9 and asked about the overnight activity. The host, an older man named Gerald, who'd been hosting that site for several seasons, looked at me with an expression I can only describe as carefully blank and said he wasn't aware of any disturbance. He said the meadow was a wildlife corridor and that sometimes rangers did early checks, nothing unusual. He said it with the specific pleasantness of someone who has been told what to say. I thanked him and went back to my site. I checked my phone that afternoon to rewatch the video I'd taken. Not in the deleted folder. Not anywhere in my camera roll. The 2 minutes of footage I had filmed at 10 the previous night had been removed from my phone completely. I want to be precise about this. I had not deleted it, I had not shared it, I had shown it to no one. My phone had been in my tent in my sleeping bag pocket from the time I filmed it until I checked it the following afternoon, and in that time a 2-minute video had been removed without unlocking the device. I drove out the next morning, 1 day early, and when I got to the ranger district office in the nearest town I asked to file a report about what I had seen and about the removal of the video. The woman at the desk was polite and unhurried and took my name and contact information and said someone would be in touch. I asked to speak with Supervisor Harlan, whose card I showed her. She looked at it and typed something, and said there was no one by that name currently assigned to that district. I put the card on the counter between us. She looked at it again. She said she would pass the information along. Back home I filed a public records request for any incident reports filed at or near Ridgeline Basin campground for the date in question. 6 weeks later I received a response, no incident reports on file for that location and date. I filed a second request, broader, asking for all incident reports for that campground across the previous 3 years. The response came back in 2 weeks, 3 reports on file, all for minor issues. A food storage violation, a noise complaint, a lost hiker found within 4 hours. Nothing from July. Nothing involving lights in the meadow. Nothing involving an overnight visit from 3 uniformed officers. I started going through newspaper archives online, the local papers covering that area, their digital archives going back 20 years. I was not sure what I was looking for. I found it anyway. In an archived edition from 9 years before my trip, a brief item buried in the regional news. A camper at a forest campground in the same district had reported seeing unusual lights in an open meadow area, and had filed a complaint after claiming that photographic evidence had disappeared from his camera. The item was 4 sentences. The last sentence read, Forest Service officials confirmed the area as a known wildlife corridor and said no unusual activity had been recorded. I found 2 more items across different years, different papers, same general area, same structure, lights reported, evidence disputed, official denial, wildlife corridor. Same phrase every time, wildlife corridor. Like a form letter that someone kept submitting to local papers and that local papers kept printing in 4 sentences and then forgetting. I contacted the camper from 9 years ago through an outdoors forum where he had posted about the incident. He responded within a day. He told me that after he had filed his complaint, he had received a visit at his home from two men who identified themselves as federal land management officials. He said they were professional and non-threatening, and that they had asked him detailed questions about what he had seen and had asked him to sign a document he described as a voluntary statement of account. He said he had signed it without reading it carefully because they were federal officials and he had not known he could refuse. He said shortly after that visit, the forum post he had written about the incident was deleted by a moderator he had never heard of, and that when he tried to repost it, he found his account had been restricted. He said that was 9 years ago and that he still did not camp alone. I posted my own account on 2 forums and a social media platform in October. The forum post lasted between 6 hours and 2 days before being removed. The social media post lasted 11 days, which surprised me. Before the account was flagged for policy violations, I was never able to get specified. By November, I had started noticing a car, a dark gray sedan, plain, no identifying marks, parked on the street outside my apartment building on a rotation that was too regular to be coincidence. Not every day, every few days. Different parking spots, but always with sight lines to my building entrance. I photographed it 8 times across 6 weeks. 4 different license plates across those 8 photographs. I ran 2 of them through a public records lookup. Both came back as unregistered. I told a friend who worked in local journalism. She was interested enough to make some calls. She called me back 3 days later and said she had hit walls on every angle, and that her editor had told her the story didn't have enough to stand on. Her voice on that call was different from her normal voice, shorter, more careful. I have known her for 9 years and I have never heard her sound careful with me. I did not push her. I did not want to pull her into whatever this was. The sedan stopped appearing in November. I told myself that was a good sign and did not fully believe it. In January, I received a letter in the mail from the Regional Forest Service office. It was printed on official letterhead and signed by a district supervisor whose name I did not recognize. It thanked me for my inquiry regarding an incident at Ridgeline Basin Campground in July. It said that following a thorough review, all reported concerns had been assessed and resolved. It said the case was considered closed. It used the word case for a thing they had told me repeatedly did not exist and had never been reported. They sent me a closure letter for it on official letterhead with a case reference number in the upper right corner. I have that letter. I have the photographs of the sedan and its 4 different plates. I have the printed forum replies from the camper 9 years before me, saved before they disappeared. I have the archived newspaper items. I have Supervisor Harlan's card, which has a phone number that rings twice and then goes to a ton that is not a voicemail and is not a disconnect. I have not been back to that campground. I have not camped alone since. I check the street outside my building most mornings out of a habit I cannot seem to break, looking for dark gray sedans in spots with good sight lines. The case reference number on the closure letter is 11 digits. I looked up the Forest Service's standard case numbering system through their public documentation. Their standard format is 8 digits. Someone made up a number for a case that didn't exist to close an investigation into an event that never happened. They did it on official letterhead. They mailed it to my home address. I think about that last part more than anything else. Not the lights, not the video, not the 4 license plates. The letter. Because the lights in the meadow could have been anything. The video could have been a phone glitch. The sedan could have been coincidence stretched past comfort. But the letter required someone to sit down and decide that I needed to be told it was over. That means someone had been watching closely enough to decide that telling me it was over was the right next move. It wasn't over. It has the same shape now that it had in July, just quieter. Just further back. Last week I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. No subject line. The body of the email was 1 sentence. We appreciate your patience while this matter was under review. I have not replied. I have not deleted it. I open it some mornings and read it and think about the lights in the meadow and the word case on official letterhead and the phone number that rings twice and then makes a sound I have never heard a phone make before or since. I don't know what they saw in that meadow. I don't know what I saw. I know that someone decided both of those things were worth covering, and that covering them was worth the resources it clearly took, and that whatever sits at the center of that decision is something I am not supposed to get close to. I camp with other people now, when I camp at all. I stay away from open meadows after dark. And I keep the letter in a folder with the photographs and the archived articles and the card with the number that doesn't connect, because if something happens to me I want there to be a record that I knew what I knew and that I wrote it down. Case closed. They said sure. Story 8. I found Marcus Teal the way most people find wilderness guides, through a listing on an outdoor skills website, 4.8 stars out of 5 of 47 reviews, the kind of profile that looks solid enough that you stop reading after the first few and just book. He advertised himself as a backcountry specialist with 17 years of experience in the Cascades and the Bitterroot Range, certified in wilderness first aid, leave no trace trainer, former search and rescue volunteer. His profile photo showed a man in his mid-40s with a calm, weathered face and the kind of easy confidence that comes from spending more time outdoors than in. The listing said he ran small groups only, 4 people maximum, and that his trips were designed for people who wanted real backcountry experience, not a guided walk on a busy trail. That was exactly what I wanted. There were 5 of us on the trip, me, my friends Carla and Deshawn, and a couple named Petra and Finn who had booked independently, and whom Marcus had combined with our group because the dates aligned. We were heading into a section of the Bitterroot Wilderness in Montana for 5 days, a loop that Marcus had described in the pre-trip email as one of his favorite routes, off the main trail network, through a high basin and back down a drainage that most hikers never saw. He sent us a detailed preparation list 2 weeks before, specific boot requirements, pack weight limits, food packaging rules, a gear checklist he said he would verify at the trailhead. He also sent a printed map of the route, hand-annotated in red pen, with camp locations marked and distances noted in his own tight handwriting. The map felt like proof of something, like the kind of care that only a person who knew what they were doing would take. He met us at the trailhead at 7 in the morning on a Tuesday. In person, he was exactly the profile photo. Calm, unhurried, looking us over with the practiced eye of someone assessing a group he was responsible for keeping alive. He checked our gear without making it feel like an inspection, asked about experience levels and any physical limitations, and talked through the first day's route with his hand on the printed map, the way someone talks through a thing they know by heart. He smelled like wood smoke and pine pitch in a way that felt real rather than performed. Carla said afterward that she had felt completely safe the moment she saw him. I had felt that too. That's the part I keep coming back to. The first day was good. Marcus set a pace that accounted for Petra, who was the least experienced hiker among us, and he narrated the landscape as we moved through it in the easy way of someone who genuinely loved the place, pointing out track signs, naming plants, stopping at a ridge line to show us how to read the drainage below from elevation. At camp that first night, he ran through what he called the rules of the backcountry: beer canisters out and away from tents, no food smells near sleeping areas, water filtered before drinking, no one leaves camp alone. He made it sound like common sense dressed up as protocol, and it was, and we all followed it without question. The first small thing I noticed was on day 2. Marcus had said at the trailhead that we would be following the red-marked route on the printed map, sticking to the annotated path except for minor variations based on conditions. But somewhere in the late morning of the second day, I noticed we had turned north when the map suggested we should have stayed northeast. I checked the map twice and then asked Marcus about it. He glanced at the map and said the northeast route had a creek crossing that ran high this time of year, and that the north variation was better footing. He said it without hesitation and without looking at the map for long enough to actually confirm anything on it. I accepted this. He was the guide. He knew the terrain. That night after dinner, Marcus told stories the way experienced outdoors people do: search and rescue calls, close weather calls. One story about finding a camp that had been abandoned mid-meal with everything left behind and no explanation ever found. He was a good storyteller. Finn and Petra were laughing. Deshawn was asking questions. Carla had her chin on her knees, listening with the expression she gets when she's fully absorbed. I was listening too, but part of my attention was on the map in my lap, tracing the day's route against the annotated one, trying to figure out how far north our variation had taken us from the planned path. The deviation was larger than a creek crossing detour should have been. I said nothing. I folded the map and told myself I was misreading the terrain features. On day 3, Marcus suggested splitting the group for the afternoon section. He would take Petra and Finn on a slower road around the base of the high basin, while Carla, Deshawn, and I took the ridge path, and we would all meet at the camp location by 4. He said it was a pacing decision, which made sense given the elevation gain. He gave us a handheld radio and said to call on Channel 7 if anything came up. We took the ridge. The views were extraordinary and the path was clear, and we reached the camp location in good time. We set up the tents and waited. Marcus arrived with Petra and Finn at close to 6, 2 hours later than planned. He said the lower route had been rougher than expected. Petra looked tired in a way that went beyond physical exertion, quiet, slightly withdrawn, her eyes moving away from mine when I tried to make contact. I asked her quietly while Marcus was setting up the cook kit if everything was okay. She said yes, just tired. She said it while looking at the ground. Finn was fine, talkative even, but there was something off about his talkativeness, a slightly too wide quality to it, like someone filling space that needed filling. The doubt hit me on day 4. We were breaking camp in the morning when I saw Marcus check his radio. Not our group radio, which was sitting on the cook box, but a second radio I hadn't seen before, smaller, clipped inside his jacket. He checked the screen and then looked at the tree line to the north, and then put it away smoothly enough that I almost missed the sequence. Almost. I had been watching him more carefully since day 2. He caught me looking and held eye contact for a beat too long before smiling and asking if I'd eaten breakfast. The smile was right. The eye contact before it was not. I got Carla alone while we were filtering water at the morning's creek, and told her about the second radio and the route deviation and Petra's eyes at dinner. Carla listened without interrupting, which is how I knew she was taking it seriously. She said she had noticed something the evening before, that Marcus had walked the perimeter of the camp twice before bed, which he had not done on the previous nights, and that he had stopped at the northern edge both times and stood there for longer than a perimeter check required. We agreed to stay together for the rest of the trip and to keep moving no matter what. The revelation came that afternoon when we stopped at a rocky overlook for lunch and Marcus spread the printed map to show us the final day's route. The map had new marks on it, not from his pre-trip preparation, new marks made in a different pen, a blue ballpoint rather than the red he had used before. Small symbols in the margins, at 2 points along the trail we had not yet walked. I looked at them while Marcus was talking and I did not recognize them as any trail notation I had ever seen. When Marcus stepped away to refill his water bottle, I took a photo of the map with my phone. I still have that photo. I have shown it to 3 people who work in outdoor education and wilderness guiding, and none of them have recognized the symbols as standard notation. I asked Marcus directly, back on the trail, what the blue marks on the map meant. I said it casually, the way you ask about something minor. He stopped walking. He didn't reach for the map or ask which marks I meant. He just stopped and looked at me with an expression that was the first fully unguarded thing I had seen from him in 4 days. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then the practiced calm came back and he said they were waypoints he had added for navigation. He said it smoothly, but he had not asked which marks. I knew in that moment, with the particular cold certainty that the body produces faster than the mind, that Marcus Teal knew exactly which marks I meant because he had put them there for a reason that had nothing to do with navigation, and that the route deviations in the second radio and Petra's eyes and the perimeter walks all connected to something I did not have the full shape of, and did not want to have the full shape of. I told the group that night after dinner, quietly away from where Marcus sat, all of it. Petra, when I described the symbols, reached over and grabbed Finn's arm and said nothing. She knew something about the afternoon she and Finn and Marcus had spent on the lower route that she had decided not to share, and whatever it was, the symbols on the map connected to it. She still has not told me. I have asked twice. She says she doesn't want to talk about it. We finished the 5th day fast and without incident. Marcus guided us out professionally, correctly, without a single moment that I could point to as overtly wrong. At the trailhead he shook everyone's hands and said it had been a great group. His hand when it held mine was warm and dry and steady. We drove away. I watched him in the side mirror until the trailhead parking lot was out of sight. I filed a report with the Outdoor Skills website when I got home, detailing the route deviations and the undisclosed second radio. The website's response said they had reviewed my concern and found no violations of their guide conduct policy. Marcus Teal's listing remained active. 4.8 stars, 49 reviews by the time I checked a month later. 2 new 5-star reviews, both mentioning how safe they had felt. I reported the blue map symbols to the ranger district covering the Bitterroot section we had hiked. A ranger called me back and took notes and said they would look into any permitted guide activity in the area. I never received a follow-up. I looked up Marcus Teal's wilderness first aid certification through the certifying organization. The certification number on his profile did not match any record in their database. 8 months after the trip, I was on an outdoor adventure booking platform looking at a different kind of trip entirely when his photo came up in the sidebar. Recommended guides in the Pacific Northwest, same face, same profile photo, same calm weathered expression, different name, different set of credentials, 4.9 stars, 52 reviews. The listing said he had 18 years of experience and that he specialized in small groups who wanted real backcountry access off the main trail network, through terrain most hikers never saw. I clicked on the listing and read every review. They all said the same things: professional, knowledgeable, made us feel completely safe. The most recent one was posted 4 days before I found it. The reviewer said it was the best guided experience of their life. They said they had already booked a second trip. Story 9, my grandmother called it the morning walk. That was the whole name for it. Not the forest walk or the nature walk, just the morning walk, said the way you say breakfast or mail, like a thing so ordinary it doesn't need decoration. She did it every day for as long as I could remember, and when I started spending summers with her at the cabin outside of Timmins, Ontario, she brought me along starting the summer I was 9 years old. I didn't ask questions about it then. You don't at 9. An adult you love does a thing every day and invites you to join and you join. It's that simple. The cabin sat on the edge of Crown Land, a stretch of boreal forest that ran north for a long way with no road interrupting it. My grandmother had lived there alone since my grandfather died in 1991, and the cabin itself was old enough that the logs had gone dark, and the porch listed slightly to the left, and the whole place smelled like pine resin and wood smoke in a way that I associated completely with safety and love. Every morning at exactly 10 minutes before 6 she would get up, dress in the same order. Socks, pants, flannel shirt, vest, make 1 cup of tea that she drank standing at the kitchen window looking north, and then set the cup in the left side of the sink without rinsing it. Then she would put on her boots and her canvas jacket and take the walking stick from beside the door, a stripped birch branch, smooth from years of use, and go outside. That was my signal to follow. The walk was always the same. north from the porch through the birch stand, to the big flat rock that sat at the edge of a natural clearing about a quarter-mile in. At the rock she would stop and tap it 3 times with a walking stick. 2 short, 1 long, and then stand quietly for what felt like about a minute, facing the tree line on the far side of the clearing. Then she would reach into her vest pocket and take out whatever she had brought that morning. It changed daily, but it was always small, always natural: a pine cone, a smooth stone, a dried flower, a handful of soil, and set it on the flat rock. Then she would say quietly and without any particular ceremony, the same phrase she said every single morning of every summer I was there. She said, "For what lives here, what was here, what will stay here." Then she would tap the rock once more, turn around, and walk back to the cabin. That was it. Start to finish, 20 minutes. We never talked during it. We ate breakfast after. I asked her once, the summer I was 12, what the phrase meant. She looked at me over her oatmeal and said it was just something her mother had taught her, the same way her mother's mother had taught it to her mother. She said the land needed to know you weren't taking it for granted. She said some places had long memories and it was respectful to acknowledge that. She said it the way you say something you've never actually pulled apart to examine, something that lives below the level of thought. I accepted that. It seemed like a reasonable thing for an old woman to believe. I kept going on the morning walks. I kept being quiet while she said the phrase and placed the small object on the rock. By the time I was 16, it was as natural to me as the smell of the cabin. I didn't think about it at all. I stopped going to the cabin as regularly after I started university. Life got complicated in the ordinary ways. Courses, friends, summers that filled themselves up. I went back when I could, maybe once a year, and my grandmother was always there, always the same, always doing the morning walk at 10 minutes to 6 without variation. The last summer I was there before she got sick, we did the walk together every morning for 2 weeks, and I remember standing at the rock beside her while she said the phrase and feeling a deep, uncomplicated comfort that I didn't examine, because it didn't occur to me to examine it. She died in November 3 years ago. My mother and I drove up to the cabin in the spring to sort through her things and decide what to do with the property. I was in the cabin going through her books when I found the notebook tucked behind the second shelf. A narrow green hardcover, old, the cover soft from handling. Inside it was my grandmother's handwriting, and her mother's before her, and a hand I didn't recognize that must have belonged to the generation before that. It was a record. Not a diary, a record. Each entry had a date, a description of what had been placed on the rock that morning, and a brief note about what had been observed afterward in the clearing or the forest. I sat on the cabin floor and read it for 2 hours. The entries went back to 1923. 100 years of morning walks documented in 3 different hands, passed down through the women of my family like a recipe. What I noticed first was the items. How specific they were, how the same types of objects appeared on the same dates year after year. Soil on the spring equinox. Pine cone at the first frost, smooth water stone on the longest day, not random. Not just whatever was in a vest pocket chosen. Coordinated. The second thing I noticed was the observations. Most entries were brief and plain, clearing quiet, 2 ravens, ground undisturbed. But the entries for the years when the walk had been missed, illness, once a death in the family, once a winter storm that made access impossible, were different. Those entries were longer and written with a pressure that dented the pages. Words like loud again, and the tree line moved closer and found the mark on the north wall again. 3rd morning running, and she would not go to the window after dark. None of us would. One entry from 1961, written in my great-grandmother's hand. 4 days without the walk, and the clearing is full of a sound we can't place, and the dog won't leave the center of the room. Did the walk this morning. Sound stopped before I reached the rock. It knew I was coming. I put the notebook down and looked at the wall in front of me for a long time. I went to my mother in the next room and showed her the notebook. She read several pages and then set it on the table and said, "Well, just that." Well, I asked her if she had ever done the morning walk when she visited. She said not really, not the full version. She had always found reasons to sleep in. I asked her if she had noticed anything during the times she stayed at the cabin without my grandmother. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said there had been one winter, years ago, when she had stayed at the cabin alone for a week while my grandmother was in the hospital for a minor procedure, and that she had not slept well the entire time. That she had heard things outside. That she had found the cabin door open twice in the morning, when she was certain she had locked it. She said she had always put it down to the age of the building and the strangeness of being alone in the woods. I went out the next morning at 10 minutes to 6. I dressed in socks, pants, flannel vest. I made tea and drank it standing at the kitchen window looking north. I set the cup in the left side of the sink. I put on my boots and my coat, and I found a smooth stone near the base of the porch steps and put it in my pocket. I took my grandmother's birch walking stick from beside the door. I walked north through the birch stand to the flat rock. I tapped it twice short, once long. I stood facing the far tree line for about a minute. I took the stone from my pocket and set it on the rock. I said the phrase. I said it in a low voice, but I said it fully. All of it, for what lives here, what was here, what will stay here. I tapped the rock once. I turned around and walked back to the cabin. The clearing was quiet. The tree line was where it was supposed to be. I don't know what I expected. I sold the cabin 4 months later to a family from the south who wanted a summer property. I told myself the decision was financial. I told myself the notebook was the documentation of a superstition passed down by isolated women who had frightened themselves into a pattern of behavior and then shaped their memories to fit it. I told myself the walk was just a walk. I moved back to my city. I went back to my life. I did not take the birch walking stick. Last September, I was visiting my sister, who lives 6 hours north of me in a small town near Georgian Bay. She has a house with a yard that backs onto a stretch of mixed forest. On the second morning of my visit, I woke up early and came downstairs to find my sister gone from the house. Her coffee cup was in the left side of the sink, unwashed. Her boots were missing from the door. I looked out the kitchen window facing north, and I could see her at the edge of the tree line, a figure in the early gray light, standing very still and facing the forest. I watched her. After about a minute, she bent down and placed something on a large flat stone at the edge of the yard that I had not noticed before. Then she stood up and said something I couldn't hear through the glass. Then she turned and walked back toward the house. I was at the kitchen table when she came in. She poured herself a second coffee without looking at me, and I said, "How long have you been doing that?" She looked at the window and then at me. She said, "Doing what?" I said, "The walk." She set her coffee down. She looked at me for a long time with an expression I recognized because I had seen it on my grandmother's face when I was 12 and asked the wrong question. She said, "Mom showed me. Years ago." She said, "You just do it." She said, "The land needs to know you aren't taking it for granted." I didn't say anything. I looked at the window facing north and I thought about the notebook, and the 100 years of entries and the years the walk wasn't done, and what was written about those years. My sister picked her coffee back up and asked if I wanted eggs. I said yes. She started cooking. Neither of us mentioned it again for the rest of my visit. But I drove home a different way than I came. A longer way, through open farmland away from the tree lines. I needed the distance. I needed to see flat empty fields and telephone poles and things that had no memory and no patience and nothing that had been waiting long enough to learn how to wait. I don't know if it helped. 3 mornings after I got home, I woke up before 6 without an alarm for the first time in years. I lay in my bed in my city apartment, and the first thing I felt, before I was fully awake, before I had thought a single conscious thought, was the pull. Not a sound, not a vision, just a pull low and steady coming from the direction of north. I did not get up. I stayed in my bed until 7, and then I made coffee and went to work and told myself it was nothing. The next morning I woke at 10 to 6 again. And the morning after that, I haven't told my sister. I haven't gone back to Georgian Bay. I keep the notebook in a box in my closet, and I have not opened it since the day I found it. But every morning at 10 to 6 I wake up and I feel it. The pull, the direction, the waiting. And every morning I stay in my bed a little less certain that staying is the right choice. Story 10. Joel and I had been together for 4 years when I first noticed something was wrong. Not dramatically wrong. Nothing that would have made sense to say out loud to anyone. Just a small quiet wrongness that sat in the back of my daily life the way a sound sits just below hearing. A feeling that something had shifted in a way I couldn't point to. We had met at a campground outside of Bend, Oregon, which sounds like a strange place to meet someone you'd spend 4 years with. But it was the kind of meeting that only makes sense in retrospect. 2 people at adjacent sites who shared a camp stove when mine broke, talked until 2 in the morning, and exchanged numbers the next day. Camping was the center of our relationship from the start. We went 4 or 5 times a year. We had gear rituals, favorite sites, a running list, and a shared note on our phones of places we wanted to get to. It was the thing most fully ours. The trip where something changed was a long weekend in late October at a site we'd been to twice before, a spot in the Cascades we both loved, a short hike from a lake that went steel gray in fall. Joel drove as he always did, and we talked the whole way up the way we always did, and set up camp in the easy wordless rhythm of 2 people who have done something together enough times that they don't need to narrate it. Everything was right. The weekend was good. Cold nights, clear days, the lake exactly as we remembered it. We drove home Sunday evening, and that was that. The first thing I noticed was the handwriting. About 2 weeks after the trip, I found a grocery list Joel had written on the notepad we kept on the fridge. His name was on it at the top. He did that sometimes, labeled lists so we'd know whose handwriting to ask about. I looked at it for longer than a grocery list warrants because something about it was off. Joel had very particular handwriting. Small, slightly back, slanted, the lowercase g with a specific closed loop. I had never seen anyone else form the same way. The list on the notepad was close. The letters were the right size, the slant was right, but the G was different, the loop didn't close the same way. I stood at the fridge looking at it, and then I took a photo of it on my phone, and then I felt embarrassed for taking a photo of a grocery list, and I put my phone away and made dinner. I watched his handwriting after that. On birthday cards and sticky notes and the shared camping list on our phones. It was always almost right, always close enough that I couldn't have explained it to anyone without sounding like I was reaching for a problem. But the G never came back the way it was. I have the photographs to prove that. I took more of them over the following weeks, quietly, the way you do something you're slightly ashamed of. I have 11 photographs of Joel's handwriting from after that October trip, and not one of them has the closed loop. The physical things came next. Joel had a scar on his left forearm from a childhood bike accident, a thin white line about 3 inches long that ran diagonally from his inner wrist toward his elbow. I had touched it many times over 4 years. I knew exactly where it was in November, about 3 weeks after the trip. I was lying beside him watching something on his laptop, and I reached over and ran my finger along his forearm where the scar should have been and felt nothing. Smooth skin. I moved my finger around thinking I had the wrong spot. I checked the right forearm. Nothing. I sat up and looked, and there was no scar on either arm. Joel glanced over and asked what I was doing. I said I couldn't find his scar. He looked at his arms and said it had probably just faded. He said it with a small, comfortable laugh that sounded exactly like him, and I laughed a little too, because what else do you do? But scars from deep cuts don't fade into nothing by your 30s. I know that. He knew that too once I called his sister Margot in December. Joel and Margot were close. The kind of siblings who talked every week and had a shared shorthand that only came from years of being each other's person. I told her I was calling to plan his birthday and steered the conversation toward him carefully, asking her how he seemed lately, whether she'd noticed anything different. She said he seemed great. She said actually he seemed really good. More relaxed than he'd been in a while, easier to talk to. She said whatever was going on in his life was clearly working. Her voice was warm and certain and not performing anything. She had noticed nothing. I started going back through old things after that call. Old photos, old videos, voice messages I hadn't deleted. I have a video from the previous January, taken at a campsite in the high desert, of Joel trying to light a camp stove in the wind and narrating his failures with the specific self-deprecating humor that had made me fall for him. I watched it 4 times. The person in the video and the person sleeping in the next room were the same in every way I could visually confirm. Same face, same voice, same laugh when the stove finally caught. But the man in the video had a scar on his left forearm that caught the late afternoon light twice. Once when he reached for the igniter and once when he set the pot down. I paused the video both times and looked at it. A thin white line, diagonal, exactly where it should have been. I found a voice message from 2 years ago. Saved because it was from a night he'd called from a campsite when I couldn't make the trip, and he'd left a long rambling message about the stars and a fox that had come into the site and how much he wished I was there. I listened to it 3 times. The voice was his, but the rhythm of how he spoke was slightly different. Not in content, not in warmth, but in the pauses, where he paused. Joel used to pause before the important word in a sentence. The man in my apartment paused after it. It sounds like nothing. It is not nothing. 4 years teaches you a person's rhythms down to where they breathe inside a sentence. I confronted him in February. I had not planned to. It came out of a quiet evening at home in a way that felt less like a decision and more like something that had been building pressure for long enough that it simply came out. I told him about the handwriting and the scar in the video. I told him I had been paying attention for months, and that I knew something was different and I needed him to tell me what was happening. I expected denial. I expected concern or hurt, or the particular look he used to give me when he thought I was overreacting. He looked at me for a long time without saying anything. Then he said, "I'm the same where it counts." Not, "I don't know what you mean." Not, "You're imagining things." He said, "I'm the same where it counts." And his face while he said it was calm in a way that was worse than anything else, because it wasn't the calm of someone who was confident or dismissive. It was the calm of someone who had already accepted something and was waiting for me to catch up. I asked him where Joel was. I heard myself say it, and it sounded crazy out loud, and I said it anyway. He looked at the window. Then he said he went into the lake. That was all. He said it without grief and without guilt, in the flat tone of someone reporting a fact about weather or distance. He went into the lake, the steel gray lake in the Cascades that we had both been standing next to in October, that we had both walked away from on Sunday evening, that I had not seen him near alone at any point during the trip. I left the apartment that night. I stayed with a friend and told her I needed space after a fight, and she didn't ask more than that. I called Margot the next morning and told her what Joel had said. She went quiet for a long time. Then she said he probably just meant something else. Her voice was different from the December call. Careful. I asked her when she had last seen him in person. She said not since the summer. I asked her when they had last talked on the phone. She said a few weeks ago. I asked her to describe the conversation. She said it was normal. I asked her where he had paused in sentences. I heard her breath on the line. She didn't answer. I have not been back to the apartment. My things are mostly still there. I have not filed a missing persons report because I don't know what I would say. That my boyfriend went into a lake but also came back, just differently. I have told 2 people the full version of this story, and both of them responded the way Margot did, the way everyone does. Nothing's changed. He seems fine. You're probably just stressed. I got a text from Joel's number last week. It said he missed me. It said the camping gear was still in the hall closet and it seemed like a waste not to use it. It said there was a site we hadn't been to yet, north of the lake, really beautiful this time of year. It said I would love it. It said we could go this weekend. Just us. I know a spot right by the water. I have not replied, but I have read the message many times, which I know is not the same as not replying. Last night I dreamed about the lake. Steel gray, cold, perfectly still. And something below the surface that had learned the shape of everything I loved about him. Everything that mattered, everything that would be enough to make me say yes. I woke up and the first thing I did was check my forms. They were fine. Both of them. Every mark exactly where it should be. I checked twice, then I checked again. I am still checking.